Spider-Man Miles Morales has a Metacritic score of 85%. It's gone on to sell over 6 million copies, and it's generally regarded as one of the best Spider-Man games ever made. But was it really just a big DLC? After all, it had a short length and reused a big chunk of assets, combat, and mission structures from the original Spider-Man. You know, kind of like the City That Never Sleeps DLC. So what makes it different? Well, in this video we're going to take a closer look at Spider-Man Miles Morales to see if it's worthy of being called a true standalone installment in the Spider-Man series, or if it should have just been the 4th DLC for the original game. And a quick warning, I will be going into story spoilers later on in this video, but first let's start with the gameplay. The opening mission follows the same big set-piece structure as the original game. Both games have Spider-Man, or Spider-Men in this case, go after a big villain. The developers made sure to give Miles his own flair when it comes to combat and web swinging, but at its core it's pretty identical to Peter's. Something that's new and unique to Miles is the Falcon Punch, the Venom powers, which are very satisfying to use and add a new element to the combat. And to be fair, the section where you ride the Rhino through the shopping mall is completely new in both setting and gameplay, and it's definitely a level above chasing Felicia through the subway in the Black Cat DLC. But just like in the original game, once the big opening is finished, the game opens up its sandbox, and this is where we see many of the elements carry over. It's pretty much the same map from the first game, but this time with a slightly reworked Harlem where Miles and his family live. Now, I will give it to Insomniac. Covering the entire city in snow was a very clever way of giving the world map a bit more of a fresh perspective. The city is filled with new collectibles like time capsules, underground caches, villain hideouts, and sound samples. The side missions are accessible through the friendly Spider-Man app, which is basically Uber Eats but for Spider-Man. And the game very much encourages you to partake in these side missions to make up for the short campaign. Come on, you know you want to rescue this cat. Also, just like in the original, the city does get filled with skirmishes between the rival factions as the story goes on. And you can fast travel using the subway. Sure, even Spider-Man gets lazy sometimes, right? Miles does get his own selection of suits, upgrades, and customizable gadgets, but the selection is noticeably smaller when compared to Peter in the original. The same goes for his skill tree, but then again, I guess having Miles relearn all the same abilities again could get tedious. Instead, the focus is very much on his two unique powers, Venom and Invisibility. Both seem tailor-made to enhance the melee or stealth combat. And as I said, they do bring a bit of variety to the gameplay, but most of the missions still consist of Spidey having to take out a big room full of bad guys. On the 4th day of Christmas, my true love gave to me 5 hanging goons. Bam, take that. Oh wow, that's one hard Harlem goon. Yeah, we're definitely getting into Home Alone territory. Oh, looks like I punched him just a little too hard. Now, speaking of mission variety, the original game tried to mix things up with the much maligned MJ and Civilian Miles missions. The MJ missions even managed to make their way into the DLC. Thankfully, this time the action always stays with Miles. You get a few sections with him out of the costume, but they're almost always short and narrative based. My god, that's one big pretzel. The minigame puzzles from the original have been replaced with puzzles inside the actual environment, with Miles usually having to move something into place and then connect the tether webs. We do also get the signature set pieces and boss battles, but there are a lot fewer of them when compared to the original. Overall, it's clear that gameplay-wise, Miles Morales is a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to new content and repurposing a lot of what's come before. But what about this game's campaign and story? After all, the story and characters were one of the strongest aspects of the original game, and most DLCs, including the original game City That Never Sleeps expansion, tend to revolve around side stories where the events have little impact on the overall plot. Well, Miles' story is quite a bit shorter in length than Peter's, but it's definitely not lacking in impact. While it does follow on from the original, taking place a few months later in the timeline, it makes sure to thematically plot its own course. The original game centered around a mature Spider-Man trying to balance the heroic and personal aspects of his life. This one is focused on a young man's search for his own identity while coming to terms with the responsibility of being Spider-Man. This isn't exactly an origin story, but Miles is still very green and you can see the weight of being in Peter's shadow looming over him. The weight of responsibility is compounded when Peter decides to shoot off on holiday, leaving Miles as New York's only Spider-Man. It's the equivalent of leaving the intern in charge of the office, except the office is full of supervillains. As the story goes on, Miles Miles, with the help of his friend Genki, begins to form his own identity while staying true to the moniker of Spider-Man. We see this with the evolution of his suit, his powers, and gadgets. The game also explores the idea of the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man by setting it in Harlem, where the nice multinational company run by the friendly Topher Grace lookalike wants to provide clean energy. What could go wrong? And it wouldn't be a true Spider-Man story without a good helping of personal drama. And the game spins many plates in this department. Miles reconnects with his estranged uncle Aaron, only to learn that he's actually the Prowler, a notorious super thief. Miles also reconnects with his childhood best friend Finn, only to find out that she's the leader of the crime gang / rave scene known as the Underground. And to be honest, I did find the Underground to be unintentionally hilarious, with their uniform yet trendy streetwear and Final Fantasy weapons. Shouldn't you kids be in school? In his battle against the street hipsters, Miles finds himself in a good old-fashioned Spider-Man action set piece on a New York bridge. Poor Miles tries his best to save everyone, but the bridge still ends up wrecked, once again reinforcing the theme of a young man struggling with his newfound responsibility. And guess what? It turns out Roxxon's CEO isn't actually a good guy at all, and his new energy technology is very unstable. It actually ended up killing Finn's brother and will blow up all of Harlem. And this is ultimately what ended up turning Finn into a quasi-villain. She's out to get revenge by any means. Miles, on the other hand, tries to do the right thing by his friend while also upholding the principles of Spider-Man. However, the two friends are eventually driven apart. The Underground then goes to war with Roxxon's private military during a foreboding snowstorm. Of course, Peacemaker Miles Morales turns up and utilizes his diplomatic strategy of beating the crap out of everyone on both sides. He then heads to Roxxon Plaza to try and stop Finn. And just like the final battle between Peter and Doc Ock in the first game, this fight also has a lot of personal stakes and emotions on the line. It's almost like this big hologram is some kind of metaphor. It's like they're fighting for the fate of the city. Very subtle. However, unlike Doc Ock, Finn does realize the error of her ways. Unfortunately, it's too little too late, and the Roxxon reactor is about to blow up. At that moment, Miles decides to fully embrace his role as Spider-Man and makes the perilous walk to try and stop the reactor. Miles absorbs the deadly energy, turning himself into a ticking time bomb. Finn then commits her own heroic sacrifice by flying them up high above the city so Miles can safely release the energy. Miles does survive, but this results in his mother and pretty much everyone in Harlem learning his identity, which they vow to keep secret, just like Joey Diaz in Spider-Man 2. The story comes full circle when Peter returns to find that Miles has both embraced the role of Spider-Man while carving out his own identity. And so there we have it, Spider-Man Miles Morales. So does it do enough to be its own game, or is it a glorified DLC? Well, I think this game does just enough to be its own thing. Yes, the gameplay is very similar and a lot of content is repurposed, but the new combat abilities along with a good helping of side content and the game's bigger campaign set piece levels do enough to make this stand out. But to me, this game's story is what really elevates it above DLC status. Yes, the campaign is short, but it still manages to retain the emotional core of Spider-Man while having a substantial impact on the protagonist's overall arc. Miles goes through the quintessential Spidey hero's journey. He experiences loss and shows the courage to make the ultimate sacrifice. He embraces the Spider-Man identity while staying true to himself and making it his own. But that's just my take. Do you think Spider-Man Miles Morales has enough to be its own game, or should it have been a DLC? Please leave a comment below with your thoughts. As always, thanks for watching. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and a big thanks to all my existing patrons. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.